let's get started then. So thank you everyone for attending today. My name is Robert Spivak. I'm the Director of Technical Sales here at CyberGuard Advantage. I'd like to welcome everyone to our webinar on AI. We're going to talk a lot about AI, its relevance to today's industries, the way that organizations are looking to integrate AI. And we do understand that because of the nature of AI and the types of things that in ways that are actually being used, that we run into situations of how do we use it correctly? And is there a best practice on the way that we should be implementing AI in organizations, ensuring that people aren't using it or misusing it or using it incorrectly? And as a stakeholder within an organization, it may be your responsibility or your team's responsibility to not only understand how AI is going to be used, but also develop governance and various other components and controls around that AI. In the industry, the ISO organization has brought out the ISO 42001 framework. And it's the first internationally recognized standard for AI, and it's designed for managing IA-related risks. So today we're going to talk a little bit about ourselves being CyberGuard Advantage, about our partner CPSI. We're going to talk about the ISO 42001 standard, some of the key requirements that you should be aware of, some challenges and some pitfalls that we've seen along the way with some of the customers we are already implementing these types of frameworks with, and we're going to talk a little bit about some case studies. Certainly, if you have questions, we will have a chat available. You're welcome to post any questions you have along the way. And at the end, we will actually have a Q&A session where we will review those, and our two SMEs or special guests will be able to help with answering some of those questions. So first, I'd like to introduce Anastasiia Mueller. She's an expert in privacy, risk, regulatory frameworks. Anna, maybe you can tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you, Robert. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Anastasiia Mueller, Director of Cyber Risk with CyberGuard. I have worked with a lot of organizations who are implementing security to protect data. And I see a lot of challenges with protecting, identifying privacy data. And I primarily work with the organizations to ensure that they build programs to support the internal processes. They build holistic risk management approaches to make sure that going forward, the business processes are protected and aligned with business objectives. Over to you, Rob.
Thank you very much, Anna. Now, our other special guest here is Nazim Chowdhury. He is an ISO auditor with deep experience in GRC, AI, and cybersecurity. Maybe you can tell a little bit about yourself, Nazim.
Same thing, Rob, and thank you, Anna, as well. So just my background, I've got a passion for protecting digital landscapes. Some of the areas I focus on are cybersecurity, privacy, artificial intelligence, and also information security audits and compliance. I've helped organizations stay ahead of evolving cyber threats and also regulatory demands and ensuring that their systems are secure and compliant. And my background has been about 6 years as an independent assessor for a variety of different international standards, including ISO 27001 for information and cybersecurity, associated controls for privacy as well as cloud security, ISO 27701 for privacy information management systems, and of course, ISO 42001 for artificial intelligence. And just my background, 20 years working with leading global independent assessment firms. So that's a little bit about me, Rob. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Nazim and Anna. I'm really looking forward to a lot of the insights that we're going to garner from you, and really looking to understand a lot more about how ISO 42001 and AI are really being now really solidified. The framework is being built in such a way that we can feel more comfortable using AI. Just a quick thing about CyberGuard Advantage. We, as a CPA firm and as a cybersecurity organization. We do thousands of assessments a year for various clients and various verticals. We are flexible because of the fact that we do a number of different frameworks, including SOC 2, PCI, ISO, and any bespoke or internal type of frameworks that you may have, things like NIST, modified versions of CSF. So we can definitely assist you with those types of things. And we do offer auxiliary services such as incident response, cybersecurity testing, which we can definitely help you round out your cybersecurity framework, your cybersecurity program, and ultimately get a better understanding of your cybersecurity landscape when it comes to the various systems and perimeter controls that you have. Nazim, maybe you could talk a little bit about the CPSI.
Certainly. So CPSI is a ISO accredited certification body. We provide globally recognized certification services for a variety of different international standards. As I mentioned, ISO 27001, 27701 for privacy, 9001 for quality, of course, 42001, and also services for the World Lottery Association and the associated security controls. CPSI is accredited to ISO 17021. And so from that perspective, our certification processes meet the highest benchmarks for quality and impartiality. Globally, our assessors are specialized in data security and privacy, and we operate globally, maintaining strict confidentiality and, of course, unbiased certification practices. In our collaboration with CyberGuard, CPSI offers flexible, tailored AI certification pathways, again, combining our deep regulatory experience as well as practical implementation support. So working with organizations navigate, of course, emerging AI standards and aligning responsible AI use with, of course, emerging compliance requirements. Rob?
Thank you, Nazim. It's great to have a partner like yourself who has an intimate knowledge of these standards, not only from a guidance or consulting perspective, which we can help with, but also being able to do the accreditation, which I know is a very difficult thing to not only achieve, but maintain. So when you're looking to be able to get accredited for whether it's ISO 27001, 9001, or even the 42001, keep ourselves and CPSI in mind. We're happy to help be able to get you through your journey to accreditation or compliance with these standards. So we're going to dive right in, and I'm going to give the floor sort of to Anna and to Nazim to talk a little bit. But when you guys see the clients you're working with and the types of environments that you're dealing with, who exactly needs ISO 42001?
Rob, I would say that most probably every organization will for sure benefit from the certification. And I'm just going to speak from my background. I'm also a lawyer, so I look at the regulations first, at the business processes second, and I'm trying to match them together to then work with the client to understand which framework will suit your needs. From the compliance perspective and from the regulatory perspective, we need to understand there are certain regulations that we always need to keep in mind. AI is something new, it's exciting. We all want to ensure that we are using it for our business purposes. However, from my experience, a lot of organizations forget about the legal part. And it's where we need to keep in mind that AI is really heavily regulated. At least that's what we see from our perspective while working with the regulations, with reviewing implementations on the client sites. And I have certain information that I wanted to share with everyone that I'm for sure something that you need to keep in mind from a regulatory perspective. In the EU and the US, we have a lot of regulations that are coming into force almost every day. Because we don't really have federal law, we have a lot of state law regulations that come into force. And based on the analysis that we perform with the teams and based on our expertise, based on the research, from what we've seen is that the state lawmakers introduced over 700 AI regulated bills. 700.
That's not That's not a little bit. That's quite a bit to have to manage,
Yeah.
especially if you operate multi-state or even multi-country. So, that's pretty amazing to hear. Continue, please.
And it's 700 only last year. So if we're talking about 2025, 113 have been already adopted. So if we'll start the same process of AI regulatory updates, I can say that 2025 will be the year of AI legislation. On the Canadian side, what we see is the Bill 194, the bill that created a lot of talks about the regulation itself, about the problems, about how the act is trying to resolve those problems. And Bill 184 finally came into force. So what it means is that every public organization in Ontario has to go through privacy impact assessments, has to perform security risk assessments for all implementation of AI. And it doesn't mean that it's public, it is private, it is procured. You have to do that evaluation.
Yeah, because definitely some organizations want to use a private LLM so that their AI would be only limited to their documentation and obviously the sensitivity associated with that, where others might decide to use the public large language model LLM to be able to garner more power or more experience, if you will, and let it learn faster. So it's good to understand that whether you're using a private large language model, whether you're using a public one, or you're using any of the tools that are there, whether it's Copilot, ChatGPT, DeepSeek, whichever one you are, you still required to understand the data that's going in there and how AI is using that data.
Exactly. And because we're talking about the regulation in a heavily regulated space, we need to understand how can we implement controls to meet those regulatory requirements? How can we implement the system, the processes to ensure that we're complying with the regulation? And from a compliance side, what we do all the time is we select the framework, we select the information security standard or the standard that we can adopt to meet the need of the regulatory compliance. And this is where 42,000 standards will play a critical role. And I'll pass it for Nazim to ask you, what do you see from your end? What clients, what companies do you work with to adopt 42,000?
Yeah, and it's a great segue, Anna. So from a number of the international legal regulatory requirements that have evolved over the last couple of years, there have been a number of principles, and I think that's really the starting point, right? We see principles tied to the Organization of Economic Cooperation Development and their AI principles. I think UNESCO has come up with ethics principles. Of course, the EU Act, NIST, of course, now has some AI principles as well as standards. But from that perspective, just back in 2023, ISO, or the International Standards Organizations, released its first international artificial intelligence management system standard, which is, of course, ISO 42001. And the intent was to provide guidance very similar to other international standards around the use and governance of AI systems. And from that perspective, a lot of what we're going to be discussing today is getting into a deeper dive with respect to the standard and the requirements. But Anna, perhaps you can give us some context with respect to applicability of AI based on kind of where an organization might sit in the ecosystem.
So an interesting point was brought to the conference that we attended this week in Nashville. The majority of AI implementations that the industry sees right now, and for example, in healthcare, is administration. So a lot of organizations implement AI just to simplify processes. We all want to write emails more efficient. We want take notes faster. And a lot of speakers that were presenting their solutions and talking about the use cases and the risk that they see in healthcare, they were talking primarily about implementation of Copilot. It might sound simple, but even the Copilot implementation should go through security reviews. And Copilot implementation alone, we're talking about all the industries, healthcare, we're talking financial industries, education. So I would say every organization using AI internally will have to look at the implementing the controls to protect that usage of the artificial intelligence.
Yeah, and you make a good point, because I mean, we usually see a lot of people with regards to web marketing, write my emails, be able to do some CRM type work, but that implementation into the hospital and financial industries is certainly going to be impactful. Go ahead, Nazim.
Yeah, I was just about to say, just based on some of your comments, was how do organizations balance AI usage, responsibility, and then more importantly, balancing innovation? And I think that's what, if we were to take a look at the benefits for users and organizations, it's really that 42001 does provide that framework, right? Managing AI responsibly in terms of governance, safeguards around ethics, especially the AI controls that are found in the standard, balancing innovation, and then also ensuring that risks are mitigated. And if I were to look at this, very high level, I think the standard itself helps ensure organizations are deploying AI tools, addressing ethical and societal controls, and we'll get into some of those controls through our discussion today. Ensuring governance, compliance, and risk management, tying back to a number of areas that Anna was mentioning with respect to the legal and regulatory landscape. And I think more importantly is meeting stakeholder expectations. So in addition to the requirements of regulators, expectations of customers as well as other stakeholders. And ISO 42000 builds on a lot of other ISO standards like 27001 for security, as well as 27701 for privacy. So again, I think it does provide that ground. The standard provides the framework for ethical use of AI.
And I think you make a good point, Nazim, is the fact that ISO 27001 is closely related to 42001. So there are some common controls there that you'll be able to build on and really be able to leverage some of the controls you already have in place, but apply them to AI. But that risk assessment and understanding the risks, as you said, for the different stakeholders, both internally and externally, and potentially through automation, because at some point you may have AI talking to AI. So how does that work as well? So really having a good understanding of how you're planning to use AI, and then using a base framework like ISO 42001 will give you the right perspective, if you will, to be able to apply the right controls associated with that. I'd like to move on and maybe just get your take, both Anna and Nazim, on some of the key requirements of ISO, and I'll pass it over to you. Go ahead, Anna.
Thank you, Rob. And I think as Robert already mentioned, 42000 is kind of similar to 27000 framework structure. So 42000 is based on so-called harmonized management system framework. So if you will open two standards, 27000, 42000, and compare the structure, you will see a lot of similarities. You will see Appendix A that has the control definitions. You will see the 42001 framework that outlines the baseline for the environment, for artificial intelligence management system. When we're talking about the differences between 27001 and 42000, is we have more attention to risk. So in the information security management, in the ISMS, I would call it, it's faster and easier. We have identification of internal, external context. We have risk assessment as a requirement. And only then, when we identify the environment, we work on implementing the controls that are in the appendix. The same logic applies here. However, we need to spend more time on the risk assessment, on identification, on internal and external context. This is where we're talking about identification of applicable legislation, because we need to understand what's applicable to the organization before starting building the system. And what you'll see in the 42,000 framework is multiple types of risk assessment. We need to perform risk assessment of artificial intelligence. We need to perform the impact assessment of AI. We need to do risk treatment. And only then we can talk about the implementation of the controls to surround the system, the model, the environment. This is what I see challenging from my perspective, because risk assessments is not just a checkbox activity. And we have a lot of frameworks available, also developed by ISO, for example, 31,000. We can also look at the NIST AI framework. And we need to understand that identification of risk at the initial stage is important. So pre-work before implementation has to be done. Over to you, Rob. Maybe we have other topics to discuss for the key requirements of the structure.
I appreciate that, Anna, and definitely there's a lot of components that we have to take into account, and you did a really good summation of that. Certainly understanding the ISO framework is your base, understanding the regulatory, legislative, and potentially even contractual obligations that might come in the future when it comes to how you use AI, things like data residency that you may have to be aware of. So I think it's very important as part of your risk assessment to understand all the different controls, the potential effects that are there. Nazim, any thoughts that you'd like to contribute here, or we can move on to the next part?
Yeah, I was just about to quickly add that in terms of risk, right? It's managing risks in terms of different use cases, right? Either it's the use, design, development, deployment, but organizations, we just need to be mindful, it's just not technical risk, right? When we look at the annex controls for 42,001, what's a little bit different from if we take a look at privacy controls or security controls, 42,001 also asks organizations to look at ethical, legal, and societal implications. So I think for those that perhaps are new to 42,001, that is going to be considerable change, really looking at risk from a different lens, aside from traditional technical controls. And it's really then up to the organization to take a look at those controls and, of course, looking at appropriate implementation, but also those governance mechanisms. So
it'll be interesting in the future how far or how close we get to the recognizing AI as its own entity, or potentially like the equivalent of a human that you have to take into account for risks. So those are really great points. Thank you both for that. Maybe we could talk a little bit about the structure now, and Nazim, I'll pass it over to you to maybe highlight some of the key pieces of the standard.
Excellent. So for those that are very familiar with ISO, ISO follows similar to, as Anna mentioned, the Annex SL structure. So it's a harmonized approach to any international standard that is either being released or under revision. And it follows the Plan, Do, Check, Act, right? So if you're familiar with, back to the quality days, the output of a process should always be the input to another. And of course, it integrates with other management systems. But high level, 42,001 covers 4 clauses, right? Starting with aims requirements that are found in the first, which is the context of the organization, right? Does the organization understand its internal and external factors affecting artificial intelligence use? That's really the first step. Second, of course, is leadership and governance, right? So is there top management commitment? Is there board commitment, if applicable? Defining an AI policy, whether it's for simply usage, development, or actually production of AI tools, as well as then defining or documenting roles and responsibilities in terms of the governance of the management system. Planning, this is clause 6, right? It's using a risk-based thinking approach to identify AI risk, conducting, as Anna mentioned, AI impact assessments or ethical impact assessments. And then it also helps to govern compliance planning, especially with legal and regulatory AI requirements, as well as contractual requirements. I'll also add that in. Support.
That's great.
So this is clause 7, ensuring that tied to roles and responsibilities, there are resources that are available in terms of AI governance, ensuring that those resources are competent, training, so awareness and training in terms of not only just having a policy, but actually delivering training awareness to internally as well as externally. And then, of course, the standard does have specific requirements in terms of documented information to support the management system. Operations is critical, and this is design, development, monitoring, and control of AI systems. And this works hand in hand with the control set that is supporting ISO 42001. And then we get into clause 9, which is around performance evaluation. And this is the processes for internal audits, defining metrics, so objectives, KPIs, metrics, even OKRs to support the measurement and monitoring of the artificial intelligence management system. Capturing stakeholder feedback, whether it's internal, external, customers, feedback from regulators. And just like any other ISO standard, ISO 42001 is very focused back to that concept of plan, do, check, act around continual improvement. Right? And clause 10, we have improvement, and that's just that corrective action process as well as adaptation to emerging risks. And again, certification supports management systems, but I'll highlight that just like any ISO standard, AIMS or 42001 is focused on continual improvement.
Maybe I can ask you a question before you jump into the annexes. So typically, like an ISO 27001, do you have the surveillance audits that you typically have to do over a cycle, or are they kind of different when it comes to this particular standard?
That's a great question. It's very similar to standards like 27001. The certification is a 3-year period, so it starts with an initial audit, and once a certificate has been issued, it's supported by annual maintenance or surveillance assessments to ensure ongoing conformity to the requirements of the standard.
That's great.
So in terms of the structure of the standard, what's important to note is that the clause requirements are supported by 2 annexes, Annex A and Annex B. And Annex A is very prescriptive in terms of the control objectives that are the organization can choose, going back to that planning requirement around risk, right? So once you've identified risks, it's important to use one or combination of those controls to mitigate the risk. And some of those specific control examples include data governance, algorithm transparency, right? So including traceability and explaining how AI decisions are made, a control around fairness and non-discrimination. So implementing mechanisms to detect and mitigate certain biases that may come about. Human oversight is critical, right? So can humans intervene in critical AI decisions and vice versa? I think that's really important to note. Robustness and security, right? So protecting AI systems from attacks and errors. And a lot of this also stems from a number of the security controls that an organization may have in place. Accountability is another control. So assigning responsibility for AI outcomes. And those that are in the development and production, the model lifecycle, right? So version control, retraining, and then what's really important, which since AI is relatively new, is decommissioning of various models that might be used. So Annex A is supported by Annex B, and Annex B provides very granular guidance in terms of the implementation of those AI controls. So in terms of an audit or a management system, an organization would need to meet the requirements of clause 4 to 10 for a process-based approach, and of course, based on their risk assessment, implementing certain controls to meet the requirements of ISO 42001. Anna, Rob, anything that you may have to add?
For myself, I do like the fact that NXB does provide use cases for AI so that you have some reference, and the fact that they do cover the full life cycle. I think it's really important. The fact not only, as you mentioned, the startup of them and run and operate, but when you want to decommission one, what are the facets or the things you should be considering? And I'm sure that it should go into a risk assessment as well to understand how are you going to decommission an AI system or a large language model, or even merge them if it's necessary. I think those are important factors to consider. Right. So moving along, let's talk a little bit about some of the implementation considerations when it comes to implementing ISO 42001 within your AI environment.
And I'll
So
start
Nazim, if you want, or Anna, if you want to get started, that'd be great.
the policies and procedures. So this is the request that we are getting from every client. How can we build the policy? What should be in the AI governance policy? How are we going to build an AI committee? This is a principle that has been introduced by the European AI Act. Because when we look at the AI and the model, we need to understand that it's a top-down approach. So we need to have support for management. We need to build the policy together with the leadership team to make sure that that policy is adopted across the entire organization. When we're talking about how to build an AI governance framework, there are few principles that we need to keep in mind. And these principles are adopted by multiple organizations and they've built by the industry. I'm talking about fair information principles, UNESCO recommendations on the ethics of artificial intelligence, and OECD AR principles. OECD principles of artificial intelligence. This is the great source of the information for any development of any AI governance documentation. It provides the guidance, it provides the principles, and if we follow industry guidelines, this is great for us to at least understand where should we start. Because when we work with organizations, the first question is how to do it. So this is where we're giving you a few keys to the kingdom right on this webinar. I'll pass it to you, Nazim, for the consideration.
Yeah, that's a common question that I always get is like, in terms of the how-to, right? And one of the conversations that comes up always is language models. And in my mind, and this kind of, I can kind of go on hours on this, but I break it down into three categories of language models: open models, proprietary models, and then domain-specific models. Open models, of course, are open source, self-hosted. So a couple of examples for those that perhaps are not familiar, Llama, Mistral, Falcon, and I find those are best for organizations that have high data sensitivity. Perhaps there's privacy or regulatory needs. So yeah, number two, of course, is proprietary models, right? So these are API cloud hosted, and they're the traditional models that I think that a lot of the folks on the call or organizations are using, right? So these are like GPT, Azure OpenAI, DeepSeek, and these are great, startups, pilots, quick, fast AI deployments. And the third, of course, is domain specific, right? So there's tools out there for healthcare like MedPalm. I think for finance, Bloomberg has a sort of GPT tool. In the legal arena, there's BERT. And of course, these domain specific models are specialized based on industries, regulation, and then of course, what's needed for that particular segment. In terms of language models, I think open models, of course, are recommended for control, compliance, but then more for cost efficiency. We get into proprietary models. They're great for advanced reasoning and scalability. And then, of course, there's combination of hybrid setups, right? So, public apps using open models for internal systems. So there could be, a combination of these three. But yeah, just to summarize, I think it's just, three categories in terms of the how-to. Anna, Rob, maybe perhaps you can get into a little bit about managing risks associated to some of these models.
Sure, my favorite topic. All about the risk. When we're talking about AI risk, and I just wanted to look at it from a different perspective. We talked about the risk for a while so far. We can group all these risks into so-called three main risk areas: security and operations, because we need to understand that this is IT environment, this is the system, it has to be protected from a security standpoint. Privacy, we want to make sure that if we give any data for training, that data is anonymized, and business risk. I want to spend time talking about the risk in the business area. And this is something that I'll share based on my experience. Do we have the third-party risk management program? When the last time have we reviewed the risk management program? What questions are we asking our vendors? Do we have there a question to the vendors we are working with? Are you going to be using our data for AI training? Believe me or not, but one of the vendors that was working with the client replied, yes, we will be using your data for AI. We'll be using your data for training. So this is an area of a business risk that I think a lot of organizations don't really talk about it, but this is something that you can go ahead and review right now. Review your third-party management library, the questions you're asking your vendors. Have you updated it to protect your organization today? When we're talking about other area of business risk, we're talking about bias, we're talking about dependency on AI vendors, because if we sign an agreement with the AI vendor, how do we know where the data will be stored? How would it be used for training? How it will be disclosed? I hope it will not be disclosed. We have a lot of problems with transparency. And interesting to map the business risks back to the actual problems with discrimination, because when you work with the AI and you work with the risk, you see that we have new areas of risk, and we have a lot of dependencies between business, between our personal life, and discrimination risk will be one of the greatest examples. If we look at the how AI was used by the industry, in 2014, I think it was, the problem that Amazon identified. Their process for hiring people and screening people for the roles, they were using AI. That AI was biased against the certain type of people. So they identified the problem only a few years later. By just looking at the resumes that they were receiving, and understanding that there is certain type of people or people with certain knowledge or experience they don't see. And the problem was because they were using the AI model that was not properly configured, and it was biased against certain people, their experience. And this is where we have a connection and a problem between business risk, discrimination risk, IT risk emerged all together. Nazim, what do you see from your experience? What's the risk areas that you see, and are there any other frameworks that we can discuss on this session today?
I think in addition to those technical risks, I think the ethical alignment risks are probably what's going to be, at least for me as an assessor, what was really interesting and for me also better learning about ethical alignment. And so the key with, of course, and you talked a little bit about kind of those principles across various frameworks, but I think the key in terms of ethical alignment is, of course, ensuring that there's trust, one with regulators internally, but then also with customers and the public. That's the first. The second, of course, is ensuring that risks tied to harm, discrimination, and ensuring legal liability, especially for a lot of the AI, not only the development and production, but also the use of AI within organizations. Also, in terms of ethical alignment, I want to highlight, I talked a little bit earlier about innovation, right? So the balance between governance, risk, and innovation is ensuring that innovation is sustainable, inclusive, which is key. And then, of course, the fourth area around ethical alignment is ensuring compliance with laws, right? The EU AI Act, the US AI laws, and of course, I think we all are familiar with GDPR. So I think that those were, in terms of balancing risk, it's really those ethical risks that really come to mind.
And I think we can continue talking about this quite a lot, guys. And I think you've covered some really good points. Just being mindful of time, I'd like to move into maybe talking a little bit about the certification process that you guys do for ISO 42001. But this has been some really good content, I think, to talk about those components when it comes to the risk and how you implement AI within your organization. So maybe, Nazim, you can give us kind of a high level on the actual certification process. So if I want to implement AI and I want to get certified under ISO, what do I need to do?
Excellent, great question. Certification for ISO is similar to, again, other standards like PIMS or ISMS. It follows a process where there's an initial audit, which is a certification audit. It can be start off with a pre-assessment of your infrastructure environment as well as your management system. That leads into what's called a stage one audit, which is a readiness review of your the clause 4 to 10 requirements, a statement of applicability in terms of those controls that you've selected to address risk, as well as planning and operations. And then, of course, there's the formal assessment, stage 2. So stage 1, stage 2 are basically two parts of the same certification assessment. Once an audit has been completed, if there are any corrective actions, they do need to be addressed, and a recommendation for certification is granted. And tied to that, of course, is a certificate that's valid for a 3-year period. And then to support the validity of the certificate, there are annual maintenance or surveillance assessments that are conducted annually. And typically that's, again, a process-based approach and includes sampling of the selected controls to support the scope and boundary of the organization's management system. So, and then that concludes with a triennial recertification audit, which then you go through this process again. So that's a certification
Continuous
process.
improvement, as they say, right? It's always
exactly
where it needs to really be embedded in the DNA of the organization, into the day-to-day operations and the checks and balances that go with it. And that will certainly help optimize and be able to move along any types of audits that you need to do. You'll have the evidence ready for those auditors. You'll have the right processes. And of course, everyone should be operating in that manner that you're expecting of them based on your policies. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I'll just quickly add that, 42001, again, because it follows the same framework as Anna mentioned, it's built on the same structure. And so, some key areas is, risk and planning, the context of aims, artificial intelligence policy, training, awareness, and then the controls, right? So, the lift, there's not much of a heavy lift, as I would say, for those that already have security management systems in place or even privacy management systems in place.
Yeah, it's kind of bolting it on to what you do with ISO 27001. You're just adding a new sort of context and scope. Wonderful. We're going to just move into a case study right now. So I'm going to allow Nazim, if you want to talk a little bit, a case study of a recent client that you work with and actually got certified as 42001.
Excellent. EIS Group is a great case study and also an example of an early adopter. As I mentioned, December 2023 is when the standard first came about. So it's, just been a little bit over a year. EIS Group is a leading provider of digital platforms and solutions for the insurance and financial healthcare industries. Their strategic goal was, of course, demonstrating responsible AI governance. The product specifically here that was assessed, of course, was called ClaimSmart. It provides artificial intelligence as well as machine learning. And so if you can kind of think of in the insurance industry, eliminating redundant manual work, streamlining the claim submission process, claim review process, decreasing fraud, especially in the insurance industry, and then of course creating personalized touch points to customers and users. Through this engagement, again tied to the standard, they were able to establish AI policies, ethical principles, very strong leadership and commitment in terms of their management system. As it was said before, it was embedded, the controls were embedded into their existing or previous security framework. In terms of training, they rolled out AI ethics and ensured responsible use through training across a variety of different roles in the organization. And the output, of course, was not only meeting European legal regulatory requirements around AI, but they were able to be successfully certified, which ultimately produces or boosts transparency, ensuring their regulatory readiness, and of course, ensuring stakeholder confidence with respect to this product. So, congratulations to EIS in terms of being one of the world's first and an early adopter. So, hopefully,
Absolutely.
more to come. And for those that are in the audience, feel free to reach out to any one of us in terms of that journey towards. To journey on 42001 and ultimately maybe even certification. So
Great. Thank you for that, Nazim. So just wanted to wrap up on a couple of next steps that if you're in your journey for AI compliance or you're looking to implement it, or maybe as many organizations, it has been implemented, but now there's a need to be able to put some structure and some policy around it. I'll divert to you first, Anna, maybe talk a little bit about or Nazim even, doesn't matter. Just kind of walk through some of the next steps that we would recommend someone who's going down the AI journey.
Sure, I can take this one. First, identify the data. Identify the data, what data you're using for internal, external AI models. Then understand the legislation, what legislation applies to the data type. It can be privacy data, it can be health data, it can be, hopefully not, credit card data. Then try to understand what controls you want to implement from the AI SMS perspective. So what controls will protect your environment? How do you ensure the compliance with the regulatory requirements? Do you need to implement additional policies, procedures? Do you need to perform additional risk assessments to meet the intent not only of the framework, but also the regulation? Start working on documenting the system. We're talking about the policies, procedures, roles, responsibilities. Go talk to your leadership team. Make sure that you have their buy-in to build a policy, because the AI governance policy will need to be leveraged for the entire organization. And once of course, risk assessments are done and documentation is ready, we are welcome to work. We're happy to work with you for the certification and readiness assessments. Where's Europe?
I was going to say, Nazim, anything else you want to contribute to that?
I was just going to add in terms of compliance and functionality, right? AI stress test, right? So especially those that are developing or producing tools before deployment, ensuring that There's resilience in terms of the operational efficiency with respect to like real world scenarios, and simulate. The other is of course continuous improvement, right? So ensuring monitoring and evolving regulations. This is really key, especially as regulatory changes, both in AI, but data protection and privacy. It's going to be really important to stay on top of that.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. We're going to be moving on to the QA portion of the session here, but I did want to thank both of our speakers here, Nazim and Anna, for all of your insight. Certainly, if there's anyone in the audience that has questions, I know I've seen a couple pop up and we'll certainly address them. But definitely want to thank you guys for all of your insight today and being able to share with the broader community some of the things that we deal with. Certainly one CPSI, if you need to reach out, or CyberGuard Advantage, we're happy to be able to help you on your AI journey. First question that I did see pop up in the chat was, have there been any documented violations on AI, and what kind of penalties or repercussions were there? If either of you have knowledge on that.
Primarily in Europe, under a European AI Act. So the way it works in Europe is that if we want to understand what fines were enforced to the organization's public information, same applies to GDPR, and you can understand the actual failure when it comes to the implementation of what article, what was the amount of fine. Yes, there is a use case in the Europe under European AI Act, and it's Facebook. What is your price? And if we're talking about the fines, there are, I don't remember the exact numbers, but they are incredibly high, because AI Act has much larger fines than GDPR. I haven't heard about anything in Canada. Haven't heard about anything in the US.
Well, I just heard in the news the other day that I think it was Jamie Lee Curtis had just reached out to Mark Zimmerman, the head of Facebook, I apologize, about the fact that they were using her likeness in some AI ads and things of that nature, and they shut it down. So I'm sure that there'll be some news about potential violations there. Nazim, have you seen any, that you can share that you've seen?
There was one a couple of, I think 2 years ago with Amazon, but it was kind of a combination of privacy and AI related. And then I think in Spain, they're coming out with some specific regulations, but no, nothing specific that rings a bell.
Oh, no, that's wonderful. Any other questions that the audience may have with regards to AI? Please feel free to add to the chat. We have another one. Do you believe that data governance has been slow in different regions, or implementing data governance in various regions of the world?
Europe is always implementing everything faster. So if I want to understand what are the practices, frameworks, examples of performing holistic reviews and implementing governance, I always reference European models. So North America, unfortunately, is not that mature if we're talking about the regulation implementation of the process, procedures, governance, comparing to Europe.
Are we seeing anything in the? Go ahead, Nazim. Sorry.
I'll just add there in terms of data governance is the requirements around data residency, and I think data residency can certainly impact like AI training and testing, and it's important going back to some of those legal requirements and organizations to consider the restrictions and where data can be transferred or processed, right? So this is really important, especially with cloud-based AI solutions. So we all know data, can reside anywhere, but especially for multi-tenant cloud systems, that definitely is a risk. So just be mindful of that. Sorry, Rob.
No, thank you. I was really going to ask is, in the Pan Asia, are they sort of the slowest adopters, or do they also have sort of their own speed at which they're operating?
I think they're at their own speed. I don't have insight there.
Okay. One of the things that I did learn about AI, and I wanted to maybe ask you guys, is about the term of hallucination. Maybe you guys could talk a little bit about how that works into a risk assessment or potentially into the ISO standard.
Well, we need to understand, well, everything that is coming into the model impacts the output, right? While the data is within the model, and this is the engineering issue as well, it will use the data and repurpose the data for other use cases. So it is important what the data that you give the model, that's going to be your output. So input output is something that is really important when we're talking about AI model.
Sure.
And the
Nazim,
key
any
there
thoughts?
is, yeah, the key there is going to really be around mitigation strategies, right? So how does an organization ensure there's like fine tuning of accurate data? Human interaction is always, important, and I always say controls with respect to external verification. So, cross-checking, and then of course, or I've seen organizations now use different tools to integrate to kind of validate some of the different models.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. I know there's a few more questions. We will answer all questions and we'll certainly get back to everybody on it. We've only got a few more minutes left. So one last question for both of you. In your experience and what you've been working on, how quickly or how fast are the statistics on companies who are adopting to AI and then adding the framework or attempting to certify? Are we seeing
In
like a
terms of
large uptick in requests and that kind of thing from?
we are so kind of going back into my history, I've seen information security as just now a transactional business requirement, and now we're now starting to see the same adoption with 42001. Of course, there's been a lot of early adopters, but not only in terms of regulatory requirements, but we're starting to see that organizations internally are trying to develop best in class tied to, the journey right now is really a lot of organizations I work with are developing their own use cases, policies, and then demonstrating that commitment. So I think we're on the uptick, but that uptick has been quite positive in terms of requests, not only for support and management systems, but also for certification. So I think that will only continue to grow.
Wonderful.
On my
So
end, Rob,
go ahead, Ann.
it's primarily request with the supporting teams with AI governance, developing policies, procedures, evaluating the environment, performing risk assessments, privacy impact assessments. So this is what we see coming from the industry as a request.
Yeah, definitely. I think many organizations are realizing we're at the start of our journey. Although we may have it implemented, we need to do a lot more. With that, I'd like to thank everyone again that's attended today. For further information, you're welcome to reach out to both ourselves, CyberGuard Advantage, or One CPSI. Our contact information is there, whether you want to go on LinkedIn, whether you want to come onto our website, there's contact forms. Please feel free to reach out to us. And thanks again for attending today and listening to these two wonderful guests and insight that they have with regards to AI. All the best to everyone. Enjoy your day, and we'll sign off right now. Thanks.
Thanks, Rob, for moderating.
My pleasure.
Rob.